Last year, something unprecedented, unheard of, in fact, absolutely incredibly astounding happened in the Supreme Court. And no, not the reversal of Roe v. Wade after 5 decades of effort. No, it was the leak of that very decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. And people have kind of forgotten about it. What's going on with that? Are we just supposed to pretend it didn't happen? The leak of the Dobbs decision months before it was officially released? Joining us right now to discuss that and the ongoing investigation into who did leak that information to the media is Zack Smith. He's a legal fellow and manager of the Supreme Court and Appellate Advocacy Program at our friends at Heritage Foundation. Zack, thanks for joining us on this.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Now, we did have reports over the weekend that the investigation appears to have narrowed down to a couple of suspects, including one clerk. Why has it taken so long? I would think that the list of potential suspects here in leaking this thing is a pretty tight one, and you would think that the justices themselves would be actively engaged in trying to figure out who it was.
Well, that's a great question, Larry. And frankly, I don't know why it's taking so long. You'll remember right after the leak happened, Chief Justice John Roberts appointed the Marshal of the Supreme Court to lead this investigation. The Marshal's in charge of the Supreme Court's own police force, which deals primarily with security for the courthouse and the justices, but they don't have a lot of investigative expertise. And so my understanding is some outside former law enforcement officials and others were brought in to help with this investigation. But it's really been an operation that those conducting have held fairly close to their vest. We haven't heard a lot about it. We did hear in September from Justice Neil Gorsuch. He said there would be a report at some point outlining what this investigation revealed, but we haven't seen that yet, and we don't know when, if ever, that report will be made public.
It is interesting, though, and noteworthy that Chief Justice Roberts chose to keep this investigation in-house and not officially trigger the Justice Department or the FBI. Should that be seen as a bit of a commentary on our Justice Department and the political nature of that body? Or is this more of just sort of a constitutional separation of powers where the judicial branch wants to keep this in-house?
I suspect it's more of the separation of powers where the judicial branch wants to keep it in-house. But look, they may not have that option completely anymore because some Republicans, now that they're in the majority in the House of Representatives, are pushing the House Judiciary Committee to launch their own investigation into the leak. We heard Jim Jordan say that at the time, that he would support such a move. And so it'll be very interesting to see what happens just across the street from the Supreme Court on Capitol Hill.
We also saw about a month ago, I think maybe 6 weeks ago, this idea floated that Justice Alito himself, the author of the Dobbs decision, had somehow leaked it. There was a suggestion that he had leaked the Hobby Lobby decision from several years ago. That rumor, that sort of trial balloon, that didn't seem to have much power behind it. Is that theory dead in the water?
Well, look, I think some on the left certainly hope it's not dead in the water. This seems like a classic case of misdirection to me, trying to shift the blame or shift where people are looking. But look, right now, Larry, we just don't know a lot about this investigation, what they found, what they've uncovered. We heard some reports that they were asking certain court employees and law clerks for their cell phones and cell phone records. But beyond that, we just really don't know what this investigation has uncovered so far.
Wait, asked? I mean, is there any subpoena power here? Again, see, this is the problem that a lot of people have with keeping it just in-house with the Marshal of the Supreme Court. Is it
right.
Politely ask for those phones? I would think that they would want to be a little more aggressive, Zack.
Well, it certainly could be. My understanding is they asked for the phones. Certainly if this is a criminal investigation, they could use a grand jury to gain access, subpoena those records, just like you said, get a warrant for those phones when necessary. But again, this investigation has been held close to the vest, and there's a lot yet to come out public.
Just logistically, because there is so much mystery surrounding the Supreme Court and how it operates when you say if this is a criminal investigation, can the judiciary on their own, can the Supreme Court trigger a criminal investigation, or does that by definition have to go through the Justice Department and the executive branch?
Well, it would have to be prosecuted ultimately by the Justice Department. There may be some instances when a court could appoint its own special prosecutor. Those are very rare. Those are very controversial. But look, more importantly, Larry, It's unclear if leaking this opinion, while it was certainly morally reprehensible, while it's done great damage to the workings of the court, it's unclear if it was a crime. In fact, John Malcolm and I, my colleague at Heritage, wrote a article at the time explaining potential criminal laws that could apply, why some likely would not apply. And this is just a really, unfortunately, a gray area in terms of where the criminal law is concerned.
That said, I've got to think it doesn't necessarily need to be prosecuted as a criminal offense. If it's determined that this was a clerk that did this, they just exposing it to the world, exposing it to the law community, and disbarring them from Supreme Court work in the future, that would be devastating to that person's career, wouldn't it? I would hope.
Yeah, it absolutely would. You know, what's ironic, Larry, is there's kind of an old story that those who watch the court are familiar with. Justice Antonin Scalia used to basically tell his new law clerks and other law clerks at the court, look, what we do here is so important. It's so important that the justices are able to freely debate and communicate their ideas. If you leak something from the court, I will personally make sure that you have a very difficult time in your career. And I think that's very appropriate because the damage this leak has done to the court, it's really hard to calculate that.
And it is pretty amazing, actually, Zach, if you think about it, over 240 some odd years, that we really haven't had, especially in the modern era of such ubiquitous leaks in this town, that the Supreme Court's been pretty tight. And yet, in the last year, not only did we have this Dobbs leak, but we also had this extraordinary story about Justice Sotomayor and concerns about masking on the bench and whether some justices weren't wearing masks. I mean, there does seem to be a bit of a pattern of behavior here now over this last year.
Well, there's always been some kind of what I would call backroom gossip that is leaked out. You know, there are several books that came out in the 70s and the 80s about the inner workings of the court. But what's really unprecedented about this Dobbs leak, Larry, is never before, to my knowledge, has a complete draft opinion been leaked. That has very real security concerns for the justices, very real concerns for the way it could impact the markets if it's a business-related decision. And so I think it is important that the justices get to the bottom of this and publicly release their findings so that we can all have confidence that this will not happen again.
I'd love to go back to one thing you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and that is how this leak has sort of affected negatively the inner workings of the court. Let's delve into that and why this is such an important issue in terms of how the court operates.
Sure. Well, there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. The justices agree to hear a very small number of cases every year, and they read briefs, they hear arguments, and then they start debating the legal issues in the cases. And we know from the justices, from clerks and others, that oftentimes there are many drafts of opinions that are circulated before the final one is released. Sometimes the justices change their votes in cases based on the arguments their colleagues have made. And so whenever a leak like this occurs, that undermines kind of the confidential nature of that process. It inhibits that robust, freewheeling discussion and really cheapens the result that all of us get, where the end goal should be for the justices just to get the law right.
This decision came out, I think, third week of June, but the leak happened in February. And there's 2 schools of thought here, Zach, and that is one of the liberal justices leaked this out to sort of put pressure on maybe 1 or 2 of the conservative justices to switch their vote. By the way, that pressure manifests into protests in front of homes, including, horrifically, an attempted kidnapping and assassination of one Supreme Court justice. The other school of thought is it was a conservative that put it out there to sort of lock it in and put it out there so that no one could jump ship. Real fast, where are you putting your money on, Zach?
Well, I think pointing the fingers at the conservative justices, just my speculation is that seems like a classic case of misdirection. But look, I think you highlighted something important, Larry. This leak, it wasn't harmless. It really did put the justices and their families in danger. Yeah. And we've seen that clearly manifested.
We'll leave it there, but hopefully we will get some more information on this, whether it's from Chief Justice Roberts and the investigation there in-house, or whether, as you mentioned, a House investigative body. Either way, it's something that needs to be addressed and answered for the American people. Thanks, Zach. More to come. You're watching Salem News Channel, O'Connor Tonight.